This program is brought to you in part by Cedar Ridge Paving and Milling, commercial and residential work. Yes, welcome to Race in Action Today. We're here today with a very special guest from the Berlin Historical Society, Lorraine Stubb, who is going to give us a little history about the Historical Society. And I have to say, Lorraine, it's been an interesting time just looking at what goes on with your club. And I don't really know that much about it, but I want you to let's kind of reminisce here and let me know, how did this all start? Tell me, how did this club start?
Well, it's a little bit before my time of involvement, but in 1966, there were a group of people who were very interested in local history in our town, including a history professor and others. And they formed the Berlin Historical Society. They became a registered nonprofit, and that was in 1966. And in the early days, they met in members' homes.
Okay.
Cindy Wilcox and John Wilcox's home in particular on Sunset Lane.
So these homes, though, where they were meeting at, were they close to the district, the historical district?
Yeah, a lot of the people who were involved were residents of the historic district. And they talked about local history. I think they had some events. They probably used public space for that. If people donated objects to them, they were stored in members' homes. So that went on until 1993, after the Berlin Peck Library was vacated and the new library was built. The town offered a lease to Berlin Historical Society to have a museum for the first time.
Oh, wow.
So when I look back at the early pictures, that space was pretty open, but since then we've collected over 4,000 items, so there's a lot more to it now.
I mean, it was always a pretty building, I'll tell you.
It's beautiful. It was built in 1901, sponsored by the Peck family, and it was the library in town for a very long time, and as I say, until the new library was built.
And that's where it all started as far as your museum goes. Okay. Now, the club meets there or no?
Yes, we meet there. Usually it's on the third Tuesday of the month we meet there. And then we have work sessions during the week. The museum itself is open to the public April through December on Saturdays, 1 to 4.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It's all volunteer run, so we're kind of gearing up for the reopening coming up.
Now, when you say inside articles, what kind of are we talking about? Like glassware or letters?
Oh my God, we have everything. We have a huge photo archive that's been digitalized. We have letters, we have scrapbooks, we have antiques, artwork, and a lot of things to do with the early industries in town.
So the history, of course, there must be some history about the brickyard at some point too.
Yeah, that's a huge factor in our exhibits. We had something like 25, 28 brickyards here at one time. And when they were putting in the railroad, they found that we had great clay deposits. So people started making bricks, and it became like a real boom industry here. And it really changed the town because it brought in a lot of different people, like particularly Italians, Polish people, everything. So they were making hundreds of millions of bricks a year.
It was big business, right?
Yes.
And it still exists today in some of the areas, I believe. They preserve them. They really don't touch them. I think they're more toward the East Berlin area.
Well, you can see the remnants. We have a lot of ponds in town.
Yes.
Particularly in front of Home Depot, along Route 9. off of Porter's Pass along Farmington Avenue. And those were pits of clay that after the brickyards went out of business, they filled up with water.
Yeah.
And now they just appear to be ponds, but they have a long history before that.
Oh, yeah, I could remember swimming in some of the ponds. Oh, my dear.
Yeah.
Boy. And something very interesting about the brickyards, which I learned recently. I am a big fan of Berlin High School sports, okay? I did play football in the day and had my sons played and daughter. And anyway, one day I was talking to somebody and they asked me how the Redcoats, that's what they called the Berlin Redcoats, how they got their name.
Okay.
And I'm assuming that it's got to be from the British, you know, the Redcoats on the British invasion or something.
Yeah.
I thought it had nothing, I had no idea it had nothing to do with it at all.
Yeah, I can explain because we did research into that, and there was a article in the New Britain Herald that back in 1936, before the high school that you and I know was built, the high school was an addition onto the Kensington Grammar School. And when they had a football team, they were looking for a name, so they had a contest. And somebody by the name of Pinky Dodson, I don't know who he was, I knew some Dodsons, submitted an entry of the Redcoats. But there was never any explanation in this article about why.
Why? That's right.
So, in talking to a lot of different people, it seems that they used to wear red ponchos or jackets, and that's the most likely explanation because
Around the bricks and the dust from the bricks.
People have that theory too, but I think that they had red jackets is more plausible. But I don't buy the whole, because when you and I were in high school, there was never a mascot that was English, British soldier.
No, there was they did have this kind of funny thing, but it wasn't.
It wasn't a soldier in a red coat. I looked through all the old
Now,
yearbooks.
the story I got was because of all this dust in the air, the Redcoats were the people working in the brickyards.
Yeah, that's a theory, but...
Is that, you don't
really
think it's fact? No?
I don't know.
Well, I thought it was interesting that it had nothing to do with the British.
Yeah. Well, why would you ever name your team after the enemy?
Yeah, I know. Well, that
didn't make sense.
That didn't make sense to me either.
And it's like there's an early patch that we see on some uniforms that is a copy of the New England Patriots. Patriot.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you're right. And but that was kind of different, I'll tell you. And those ponds, between fishing and swimming, I did attend them. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Some of the biggest carp I have ever seen are in those ponds.
Really?
I was watching this guy one time who pickles them. Don't ask me. There's a German fellow that pickled them. He caught a carp that weighed 65 pounds.
Oh my goodness.
It looked like a shark. I'm telling you, that's how big it was.
Must have been like this.
Oh, it was huge. It was huge. And then we used to naturally fish for, big mouth bass come out of there, and I mean ice skating in the winter, right? They would freeze over. I mean, there was a lot of activity around those ponds, you know.
So you haven't asked about the crane.
No.
The crane in the pond off of Route 9. It's the most frequent question we get. Like, what is that crane? And it's part of a steam shovel that had a wood body.
Yes.
That's buried in there because it was abandoned when that brickyard went out of business, and they never retrieved it.
Yeah, it got stuck in there, filled up with water. Unfortunately, when we were growing up, we had one of our young people in town got paralyzed.
Yeah, I remember that.
Pepper, his name was. We used to call him Pepper. From in the water, hitting a crane, hit or metal or something in that area, you know. Well, yeah, you're right. That's a good. That's another milestone that or location that's a common question. Why is that thing there? You know what I mean? Now, the big question, though, is how did this meeting house come about here?
Oh, the meeting house. So
Yeah, we have pictures of that. I believe it's a yellow structure.
yes, the yellow
or gold, or however
that
you
was
want.
actually the original color, because back in the 18th century, white paint was unknown here. They used local pigments, and we actually traced back to that was the color, as was the same color for the Kensington Meeting House on Percival Avenue. But they have an interesting history, because the first English settlers that came here from the Farmington Congregational Church and settled in the Christian Lane area,
Yeah.
they built a little meeting house there, and they became known as the Kensington Parish.
I don't even know where that is. Where is that? I don't even know where that is.
There's a marker for it on the corner of Deming Road and Christian Lane.
Oh.
There's a stone marker for the,
I didn't know.
original
I had no
meeting house.
idea.
Yeah, and there's a historic cemetery there.
Yeah, I know the cemetery's there, yeah.
So back in those days, I was telling you earlier, this is before there was like regular government, and the Congregational Church, being the first settlers, they kind of created their own government. So all the town meetings, taxes were paid to the church and everything to maintain it, but it was all centered around the Congregational Church. So that meeting house grew over time, and eventually it wound up at the corner of Porter's Pass and Farmington Avenue. There was a meeting house built, but the congregation was getting so big, and the people that lived to the east didn't want to travel that far, nor did the people at the west.
See, I have never heard that. I have never heard that that was a location of a meeting house. Never.
Yeah. I mean, now it's that brown real estate building, I think.
Yes, yes.
On the corner.
Yeah.
Across from Walgreens.
Yep.
So when that congregation wanted to split, they had to call in an impartial arbitrator from Massachusetts, and his name was Colonel Worthington.
Oh, wow.
So that's where the Worthington name comes from.
See, I have never heard that in my life. Never. Colonel Worthington. Oh, my dear.
So he negotiated and found places for the Kensington Parish. They retained the name Kensington, and they moved to Percival Avenue. And in 1774, they built their meeting house. And then the people to the east built on a site that later became Worthington Ridge, and they called their parish Worthington Meeting House. And what's really cool is they took the beams from the original building and divided them up and hauled them into building both of those meeting houses, which are actually 250 years old now.
So the one on the Worthington Ridge you're talking about,
Okay.
originally was called what?
Worthington Meeting House.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
See, I always thought the name came from George Washington. Don't ask me why.
No,
But
no, it was before his time.
It was
as
before his
president.
time,
It was
yeah.
before the Revolutionary War.
Yeah, yes. That is interesting, I'll tell you. So that became the main meeting house.
Well, there were two, and they kind of rotated town meetings between them. There's actually New Britain was part of it at one time, but then they later split off to form their own government. But it's interesting that the Kensington Meeting House remained a church all this time, 250 years, and the Worthington one, it was a church, and then it became town hall for Berlin.
Yes.
Then it became Worthington School. And then it was Board of Ed offices. So it's been adaptively reused over time. So it has a lot of history to tell.
Yeah. My memory, when I first came here, when I was a little boy, it was 1956, 57 area, I went to Worthington School in fourth grade.
Yeah.
And it was just, to me, I said, why would they want to use an old building like this for a school? But the history there is just beyond belief.
Well, we had quite a few like older schools like that before the newer ones were built. Like Ledge School, that's near the new town hall complex and library. It's a red building.
Yes, yeah, the Little People's, or whatever they call it.
And the Little People's Playground, that was a school.
Yeah.
And we had Selden School, Bandbox School.
Yep.
There was a school out on Chamberlain Highway where the fire department is now.
Oh, wow.
And there were a lot of little schools.
A lot of the history, huh?
And then when Willard School was built, named for Emma Hart Willard, who was one of the first women educators in the country, Worthington closed because the state had ruled that wooden schools were unsafe to be used for schools, so they built the Willard School.
I got to ask you a question that has really been bothering me lately. When I was a young boy back then, there was a woman that lived near the school, and she had a parrot. Really? And I don't know if her name was McGee. I can't remember who it was. And I'm trying to find out who was she.
Well, right, and there's a Victorian house next to it, and Mary Griswold, who was superintendent of schools way back, she lived there with her sister, and Griswold School in Kensington was named for her, but I don't know if she had a parrot.
Yeah, this woman had a parrot that I was just fascinated with back then by, seeing a parrot in someone's house like that. Oh.
Was it the house?
But I didn't know that.
Was it the house immediately behind the
No, it wasn't behind it. I don't believe it was behind it. I believe it was on the, more to the right, if I'm not mistaken. And you said there's a Victorian house there.
Yeah, it's gray. That's the Griswold house for Mary Griswold.
Well, that maybe makes sense. It might have been, there was two sisters. That one, yeah. Wow, it might have. See, I could never find out who she was. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it was, when I asked people, they said, "Who the heck was you parrot?"
Oh, I know people have parrots. The problem with parrots is they live like 100 years.
Yeah, So
you have to have a plan.
This parrot lived 100, and this parrot did, I'll tell you. Now, the other question I always wanted to ask somebody, the library on Worthington Ridge has got some historic thing too. That's not that new, is it?
That dates back to, I think it was 1830. It was an academy building, so a private school originally.
Right.
And then it served many purposes over the years. It was even apartments for a while. But then the Brandegee family, who lived next door, and I own that, donated it to the Berlin Free Library Association in the 50s to be the library.
Yeah.
But there had been a previous library. I should send you a picture of that because that was closer to Hudson Street, kind of across from Hudson, and there's an empty lot there right now. And it was a really charming cottage-style building.
Wow.
And that was torn down. But,
yeah, that's interesting history. And so the meeting house, Lorraine, I mean, that has been used for centuries.
Well, it's 250 years old now.
And now, do your organization have something to do with this meeting house now?
Berlin Historical Society has an interest in it because the building we're in now, the old Peck Library, needs a lot of major repairs. It needs a new roof. Underneath the roof, there's lead paint, which will come raining down if they start doing the roof. So they need us out of there before they can do that. And the building as it stands now, it's not climate controlled.
Okay.
It's not ideal for storing valuable things.
Yeah. You want a good environment.
So the Historical Society has an interest in moving to the Meeting House building, but they're not the main group. This is where I wear another hat. Another group it's a town-owned building, but another group, which we consider a sister group to the Historical Society, and they have a nonprofit, and I happen to be the president of that.
Now, what do you call that?
It's called Friends of Worthington Meeting House.
Oh, wow.
So we're the advocates for the building, and we've been raising funds, contributions from people for it. And right now we're working on a grant to have it repainted again. But the town does own it, and the town invested a lot of money into making sure it's secure.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember they did something at a foundation at some point.
The foundation it was originally a brownstone foundation, and it was unstable. This was back in the first go-round in the 1970s, and so they had to put it on a new foundation. But the more recent work was to shore up the beams.
Yeah.
There's like steel beams.
Yeah,
sistered in
something
with
about the joints. You would make steel to tie them together, right?
Yeah, just to make it more secure. But the inside, because it had been reused so many times over the years, they basically stripped out all the partitions and everything. So it's a big empty space. All the old bones are there, the structure, but it's just a big empty box when you go in. It needs to be finished off inside.
You were saying that you need to do work at Peck, the museum. Now, were you planning to move to this area or something?
Well, the town's plan is for us to move to the Worthington Meeting House, and then we would vacate the Berlin Peck Library, and that I don't know if the town would repurpose it for something else or lease it to somebody. I'm not quite sure what the plan is for that.
Yeah, I mean, I really love, they really should preserve it, really.
Oh, it's a beautiful building.
It is for
the wood in it.
For a future,
like English walnut.
That's right. It should be preserved as a natural, specific site. You know what I mean?
The architecture is so unique. It's got these little eyebrow windows.
I mean, don't get me wrong, the meeting house is beautiful too, but I mean, the meeting house is going to take some serious money, right? Am I thinking right?
Yeah, and the longer they wait, costs escalate. So
But that's your plan, though, eventually to move there?
We need more space, and it would actually have enough room to have meeting rooms in it and use it as a community cultural center. So you could have art shows, small events, lectures, music.
Have classes there
like
too for artwork or something. Now,
and you'd be surrounded with all our artifacts from the history museum.
Absolutely. Now, the other question I have, the building, the house behind it, you own.
Yes, Berlin Historical Society was offered to buy that house in 2017. Esther Woodruff, who owned it, had always envisioned that it should be part of the meeting house because it's built so close. I mean, it's maybe 10 feet from the meeting house. And our research has told that that little house may have had some purpose related to the meeting house because it is so close. And the original part of it is in the shape of what they called Sabbath day houses back then, when they had all-day church services and people would come from miles away and need a place to cook a meal. So we're thinking, because that's a very old house, when we had volunteers work on stripping down the carpeting and everything, and there's really wide floorboards and paneling, and we've tried to bring back the original look. But Esther always saw, it's a beautiful green space. Her family was very into flowers and plants and trees, and it's just a beautiful space.
So the lot itself is pretty big too, right? The land.
It's 1.5 acres. So combined with the meeting house space, it would all flow into this giant green space.
And at one time, it was really kept up pretty nice too, right? With flowers and gardens.
Oh, it still is.
Yeah.
Some of our members created a butterfly garden because Esther Woodruff was really into that. We've had events up there.
Yep.
We have our later spring tag sale up there.
You ever have like a cookout or something over there?
Yeah,
or?
we've had picnics
Yeah.
and like meetings and things like that. We envision more of that when we've had walking tours of Worthington Ridge. That's
Yeah.
kind of the meeting place, and we
Yeah.
have refreshments there. And we've had cemetery tours on the grounds.
Wow.
Where we bring in faux cemetery stones that one of our members created, and then we dress up in costumes and tell the stories of the people who were
Well,
buried.
back then, I mean, when we go to some of the older cemeteries, you see a lot of brownstone, which is a favorite thing of mine, I'll tell you. You know, I don't know if you ever, if anyone ever knew in your organization, I built a brand new house in 2001. The house is a reproduction of an antique house.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. It's got wide pine
Really?
floors, yes. The only thing I don't have is the exposed beams, which I'm a big fan of.
Yeah.
I love architecture from the colonial period, but I don't have that. But if you, the outside is clapboards, the windows are 12 over 12.
Wow, you're a kindred spirit.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, my interest in that, looks of that in the history is immense. That I'll tell you. But it's good to see that you have two organizations. I never knew that. That's very special.
Yeah, and that's kind of confusing to some people.
Yeah.
Like, who's running the show with the meeting house? But do we have time?
Yep.
Oh. But I'm also involved in, I wear another hat with the Historic District Commission also, which is a town commission. So that's a whole other thing.
Well, I have to say, Lorraine, when you're having fun, time flies.
Yeah.
We're going to have to call this show kind of to an end here. And we're going to resume our second show. I want to remind viewers that we will have part 2 will be coming, after this show airs. There'll be another show, part 2. And I want to thank everybody for watching. And when you're in Berlin, look for that meeting house and Peck Library. You'll see a lot of history there. And at some point, you'll have to get me to be a member of this thing. I'll say thank you, Lorraine.
Thank you.
It's been very interesting. And I wanted to thank everyone else, and good night. This program is brought to you in part by Just Results Weight Loss Center in Berlin, Connecticut.